My dad really wants to understand the language of the internet, specifically the meme-laden, self-referential, ironic Zoomer language of the internet. For context, he's in his late 40s, and while he's fairly online, he's not by default in the circles that understand this kind of thing. So, when we're on a long car ride, and I unthinkingly say the phrase, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, I'm going to be forced to explain that for the next 15 minutes, minimum. This even applies if his mother, my grandmother, is also in the car, and I don't think she understood a word I was saying. In fairness, I don't think I did a very good job explaining it, but that's kind of the point. We use these phrases so easily, so casually, and yet when we're forced to try to formally pin them down, we struggle. Because I can define for you what the words gaslight, gatekeep, and girl boss mean individually. Gaslight, derived from a 20th century film of the same name, to cause someone to doubt the evidence of their own senses through a sustained denial of the reality that they perceive. Gatekeep, sort of like that thing some nerds do, where they're like, oh, you're not a real fan of this unless this. Oh, you think you're a fan of Taylor Swift? Name every single one of her lyrics from every single album. Can you do that? If not, you're not a real fan. Girl boss, a sincere expression of how one believes women should have power that comes from one wave of feminism or another that's been sort of co-opted by Zoomers into this weird, ironic Zoomer thing, and God, I can't even define this one, can I? But the phrase means more than that. The phrase doesn't just mean gaslight plus gatekeep plus girl boss. There's a context in which it's used that's hard to pin down. It's sort of a feminism girl power compliment with a tinge of criticism, but only a little, because the things are bad, but sometimes it's good to be doing a little bit of bad things, especially if you're a woman. And sometimes we use it towards men, and that's its own thing. There's even more something going on there. And that gives it a second meaning through another level of unexpected irony, and this is my point. It's so hard to define memes. Why? Before we go further, I think we need to dig a little bit deeper into what a meme is. To do that, rather than going online and scrolling through 600 posts on Twitter or Tumblr or your social media of choice, we're instead going to read a bunch of literature from the late 20th century, before the internet existed, that talks about memes in a completely different context, and then we're going to use that context and we're going to apply it to the internet, and we're actually going to learn a whole lot about what these things are fundamentally, and that'll help us understand why they're so hard to explain, and we'll learn a bunch of other things along the way, so let's get started. Part 1. What is a meme? The word meme was coined in 1976 by Richard Dawkins, the author of a book called The Selfish Gene, and he sort of did it a little bit as an accident. He meant it to be a brief offshoot to his main theory, which he called universal Darwinism. Quick reminder, Darwinism, it's the theory of evolution, it's survival of the fittest. You were probably taught it in school unless you're from certain places in the United States that I'm told don't teach that anymore. But if you didn't learn about evolution, brief summary, things that survive better, things being animals, really, originally, that survive better, reproduce better, and when they reproduce better, their kids will share their traits, and so things will get better at surviving. Universal Darwinism says, not just genes, other things can also do that. Other things in the universe could have arisen by a completely different biological mechanism, but they could have still been driven by Darwinian evolution, and that's cool. And that was what Richard Dawkins was saying. And also, as an offshoot, he was like, maybe ideas are a replicator too. Because you can't really prove a theory with one case, and he didn't have aliens, and so he was like, I need to find a second replicator on Earth, and he came up with this wacky idea that ideas can behave a little bit like genes. I mean, if you think about it, ideas spread themselves, ideas change in the spreading, and there is a selection criteria. Not every idea gets repeated. So why wouldn't they sort of evolve? Let me break that claim down a little bit. So Dawkins calls these things memes. And that's why this is related, because memes, they sort of turned into the internet thing, but they started as this. Dawkins named them this because he wanted them to rhyme with gene, to sort of suggest the similarity between the concepts, and also because it sounds sort of like a French word that I don't remember right now, and he says it should be pronounced to rhyme with cream. Sure, buddy, we'll do that. I guess we do. He did define one of the major words of the 21st century. Good for him. Anyway, To understand why ideas are kind of the same thing as genes, we need to look at the 3 criteria that Dawkins says are necessary for something to be a Darwinian replicator. First off, we have heredity. When the replicator reproduces, it passes down most of its traits to its offspring. We understand how genes do this, and memes, well, the point of communicating ideas is to communicate them and to make them the same in the other person's head. If you understand what I'm saying, the idea has been reproduced. Heredity has occurred. 2. Variation. When the idea is reproduced, it's not reproduced perfectly. In genetics, we see this with mutations. The genes change over time, and this is how evolution happens. Mutations are sometimes good, and then the good mutations stick around. With ideas, well, they also change. If you need proof, look at Hit Party Game Telestrations or the last fight you had with your best friend. Sometimes miscommunication happens, and that's part of the human experience. 3. Selection. When we say survival of the fittest, there needs to be a fitness function, something that makes the fittest survive and everything else die. In genetics, we see fitness functions in things like limited amounts of food or the predator chasing you. In mimetics, the fitness function is simply being interesting. Interesting ideas get repeated. Boring ones die in the heads of those who conceived them. Dawkins' argument isn't that these 3 things are part of the recipe for evolution. They're the whole thing. If anything that replicates itself creates copies of itself that then create copies of themselves and so on and so forth, if anything has those 3 properties of heredity, variation, and selection, it will evolve. It will. There's nothing for it. It just has to evolve. Or, to put it in some slightly simpler words, if there is a replicator which makes imperfect copies of itself, only some of which survive, then evolution simply must occur. Susan Blackmore, The Meme Machine. Ideas in human minds have these pressures. They have for hundreds of thousands of years. So what have they been doing? That's the question that memetics, the study of memes, aims to answer. When CJ the X defined memes in his very good comedy skit / video essay / I don't even know what to call that video about reviewing memes, I'll put it on the screen or something, he referenced Richard Dawkins at great length, and then he sort of seemed to assert that internet memes are unrelated to Dawkins' definition.
Dawkins has provided a great intellectual service to humanity. He has provided us with the optimum definition for a concept as slippery but important as the word meme. In his own words, it should be pronounced to rhyme with cream. Die-hard Dawkins fans are probably seething at this point, like, you don't understand or respect what Dawkins has contributed to science and rationality. And you're right, I don't. I just needed to find out what the origin of the word meme was to maintain my reputation for unnecessarily thorough research.
I don't think that's... My roommate's here. Hello. I don't think that's fair, though, because I think that the things we call internet memes and Dawkins' academic cultural definition have a lot more in common than we think. Internet memes are that, fundamentally. They're a subset of that, but they are the same thing. Let me try to explain. Going back to Dawkins, it's 1976. He's not talking about internet memes. He's talking about tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothes, fashions, ways of making pots or of building arches. These ideas spread from human to human in a similar manner to how animals colonize an environment. They might be able to better survive in some environments than others. Just like how the gender fuckery meme that gets thousands of notes on Tumblr might be met with a chilly reception on 4chan. That's a jungle creature being moved to the desert and dying of thirst. Or, to use an example that's a little bit closer to Dawkins' definition than the modern one, imagine that you have a style of making concrete in ancient Rome that relies on your rich lime content in your sand. And this too is a meme, the techniques of creating an object or a self-replicating idea. And those techniques would thrive in ancient Rome, but if a trader tried to talk about them to someone in another area, due to lack of the access to the same raw materials, the strategy would fail and the meme would die. Me telling you this fact right now is a meme too. Somehow, somewhere, I heard something about ancient Roman concrete and how lime made it better. And I heard that, and now I'm saying it, and I did not fact check it, so you should not believe me, because lies can make great memes and can easily be replicated and spread just like any other. Truthiness isn't a part of this discussion. Don't trust people talking about sources outside their areas of expertise, etc. You're on the internet, you probably know this already. My contention here is that internet memes are a subset of that. Like, all of this stuff about how these are completely separate domains and the academic stuff and the internet stuff are different stuff, they're the same stuff. They're a new species of meme, but they fall under that same umbrella. Every iteration of them, from the advice animals that I'm too young to properly remember, to the these 4 lines are funny because these 7 lines are funny because they're reminiscent of a 4-paneled comic that some people laughing at the lines don't even remember. So sorry about the noise that must have just made. These are Dawkins memes realized on a larger and more complicated scale than he could have possibly imagined when he wrote this book in the 1970s. Now, I should also sidebar maybe that this guy is kind of an obnoxious atheist and he holds a lot of beliefs that I don't, and I'm gonna kind of be done talking about him now because his beliefs have been expanded upon by others, and I was supposed to have the book here with me, but I left it down there. Here's a cover that has changed so much in meaning in the last 20 years that it's basically unrecognizable. If you show this to the average Zoomer, they would probably laugh. The juxtaposition of the vastly shifted definition of the word meme with the funny green man on the cover makes it really hard to take this book seriously. I took this book seriously. I read it like 6 times. I didn't stop talking about it for like a month and a half. Ask any of my friends. They remember. They are very aware of this. But I think that the points that this book is making are really relevant to trying to understand what it is about the internet meme that makes it so uniquely inscrutable. And so to start to understand that, because remember, that was the original point of this back when we started talking about all this, we said that all of this literature is going to help us understand why internet memes are so hard. I said earlier that memes were ideas. That's not wrong, they are, but Blackmore, the author of The Meme Machine, has a sort of more detailed specification in mind. Memes are ideas that are learned through imitation. I will use the term imitation in the broad sense, she writes. If you hear a story from your friend and you retell it, you aren't copying their every word and mannerism, but something is being imitated. The gist of the story is being copied. If in doubt, she concludes, remember that something must have been copied. Stories, behaviors, manners, it turns out most of our ideas are acquired this way, but they aren't all. If I walk a winding forest path for a year, I could memorize every detail of the route, every tree, and every root in the path, but until and unless I repeat it, tell it to someone else in service of their understanding that same path, it may be an idea, it holds a lot of power within me, but it's not really a meme. That's a personal experience, that's a separate thing. There's an important point that Blackmore makes up front that is going to be good to keep in mind as we explore this mimetic theory. The general theory of evolution must apply to both genes and memes, but the specific details of how each replicator works may be quite different. I used the ecosystem metaphor earlier to describe how ideas might succeed or fail differently in different minds, but maybe the human mind has far less differences than the natural world. Or maybe it has more. All of the mechanisms that memes use to spread are so fundamentally different from genes. Although we can understand that they will evolve, we should be wary of becoming too familiar with our well-understood metaphors based in biological evolution, because they may not apply exactly. Here's something that I think demonstrates that well. Let's say you have a group of humans and they all make up little tunes that they whistle. This isn't a good example for me because I can't whistle very well at all, but I assume you can follow the basic concept. Some of the little tunes are more likable than others, and they tend to get lodged in the heads of those who hear them, though, of course, not always without alteration. Over time, you'll hear people whistling the more likable tunes more and more, and eventually you'll hear tunes that are even more likable than the first ones you started with. This is because the random alterations will eventually lead you to something better, provided you don't already have the best possible thing. That's it! That's mimetic evolution, the way memes evolve. They did it. Just then. That's the simplest possible example of it, and we'll get into more complicated things shortly, but that's a great place to start. Now, imagine genetic evolution in the same place. Let's say people have hard-coded into their genes a certain tune to whistle. People with more likable songs will be more likely to find partners and reproduce. The tunes will mutate in the reproduction, and so each generation, in aggregate, will have better tunes than the last. You can probably imagine that this process is going to be a lot slower than the mimetic way, and you'd be right. The difference here is between horizontal and vertical transmission. Think of a family tree. When parents pass traits to children, that's vertical transmission. When traits are passed freely within and across generations, that's horizontal transmission. Genetics works exclusively through vertical transmission. You get your genes from your parents, not your friends. Mimetics can work horizontally, as in this example, but also vertically. Religions, for example, tend to be passed from parents to children, though, of course, people can and do convert later in life, so it's not exclusively vertical, just largely. Before we go on, I'd like to briefly define a few more words. We've already got memes, so it shouldn't be a huge step to get to mimetics, or the study of memes, and mimetic is an adjective that refers to anything having to do with memes. Memeplex might take a little bit more explanation. A memeplex is essentially a collection of ideas that have adapted together. One commandment is a meme, 9 more in a Bible to boot, and you've got yourself a memeplex called Christianity. Sidebar, a lot of mimetic theorists use these theories to belittle and mock religion, and they're kind of aggressively atheists, sort of like Richard Dawkins is. And while I'm not religious myself, I don't intend to do that. I think religions are generally worthy of respect, and so I should clarify that when I say Christianity is a memeplex, I take no stance in either direction as to whether it's true or not, only to note that whether or not it is true, the collection of ideas still functions as a memeplex. Sidebar over. So that's a meme, a replicable idea that evolves entirely within the environment of our minds, or more precisely, in the environment between our minds, whether that's spoken word, paper, or the internet. It's easy to see that internet memes do, in fact, fall within this category, despite what some people might have to say about it. What's a little bit harder to get your head around is that, at least according to Susan Blackmore, memes are the single fundamental thing that separates humans from other primates. Part 2. The enormous human brain has been created by the memes. But, are you being serious? Yes, I am literally quoting this book. That's the conclusion that Blackmore draws in the 6th chapter of The Meme Machine, that the explanation for an as yet unsolved mystery of human evolution is memes. Sidebar, for those who aren't familiar with human evolution offhand, humans have a really big brain, which from an evolutionary standpoint is weird. It costs a lot of energy, and it makes birthing and infancy significantly more dangerous, among other things. We can look back now and see that our big brains have been the cause of much of our success, but evolution can't see the future. For these brains to have come about, there would have needed to be advantage at every step, from small to a tiny bit bigger than that, to a tiny bit bigger than that, to the brains of today. And that advantage would have needed to be significant enough to outweigh the costs, which, as we know, are significant. So what was it? Theories abound. It could have been for making tools, it could have been for hunting, it could have been for being social. Blackmore proposes that the driving force was imitation, that the development of valuable ideas was worth growing the brain for. In a word, memes. Think about it this way. We know that memes are a replicator because of the human capacity for imitation. That means that the second that one human became able to imitate another, memes started to exist in their primordial soup of what is the equivalent of DNA floating in the sea. The barest fundamentals begin to creep into being. This is well before language, to be clear. These proto-memes are of the sort of one caveman sees caveman Grug making an axe and copies it. In this case, it's the axe that's the meme, or more precisely, the techniques of creating the axe, since that's what's imitated. That's what the proto-meme here is. I don't know why I'm trying to record while my throat feels like this. Jesus Christ. Being able to make axes and whatever other tools were being passed around by your tribe is an advantage to survival. That's an advantage to the gene, not to the meme. As a result, people with better copying mechanisms were more likely to survive and reproduce, and I think we're far enough into this video that you can probably see that this is the evolution thing happening, not to memes this time, but to genes, the normal kind of evolution, because having a brain that can more effectively use the memes is beneficial to survival. More and more brains had mechanisms for using the memes. We got better and better at them. Imitation is cognitively difficult, and you probably need a big brain to do it, so the brain gets bigger as it gets better at using the memes, and that is the difference. The strength of these memes is the difference that pushed us beyond being slightly smarter apes with slightly bigger brains and turned us human. Okay, but like, really, though? But, like, are we being serious here? This argument, this book from 1999 that nobody cares about now, that's, like, completely implausible, right? Like, there's a reason that this book was published in 1999, and yet today we think of memes as funny internet pictures. It didn't work. Like, this theory clearly didn't catch on. Whether that means it's wrong, I'm certainly not qualified to say, but there is one thing that caught my eye here, and that's why I'm making this video rather than forgetting about this book and reading more interesting things. I would not be surprised, she said, if specific neurons were found that carry out some of the basic tasks of imitation, but we will need to know a lot more about how imitation is done before we can guess what to look for. She made this guess when she was talking about the big brain in 1999. Mirror neurons, the specific biological mechanism by which humans carry out the basic tasks of imitation, weren't well understood and publicized until the following decade. She knew, or rather the theory of memetics successfully predicted, a development that almost all of us wouldn't properly understand until years later. And so when I thought about putting down this book and doing something else, and doing any of the other things that I could be doing with my time, it kept coming back to that in my head. It kept coming back to, she knew something before the rest of us did. And maybe that means this theory is sort of worth thinking about. But memes turned us human isn't even the end of Blackmore's argument. I didn't understand this until like the 5th time reading this chapter. She's saying that this step of imitating the useful survival technologies was only the first step of the memes taking over process that she calls memetic driving. What happened next was people learning to imitate the best imitators. Once lots of survival-enhancing memes were in the environment, the limited time to learn and copy all of them meant that there was further genetic advantage in selecting the best memes to replicate. However, the category of memes to replicate is broad, and memes evolve faster than genes, so it can't be hard-coded. Your genetics can't know we need to make an axe, because the development of the axe goes faster than genes' ability to respond to what an axe is, and by the time the genes could respond to a specific technology, the memes would have moved on to something different entirely, and so you can't just code on technologies. You have to code on heuristics. You have to develop strategies for selecting the best memes that use context and adapt intelligently. Those heuristics, Blackmore suggests, are things like copy the most obvious memes, or copy the most popular memes, or copy memes to do with food, sex, and winning battles. These heuristics, when certain humans had them and others didn't, made the humans that had them more adept at imitating the best memes, therefore more adept at surviving, therefore their genes spread more often, and therefore the heuristics spread throughout the population. They took over everything because they worked. But now, memes could evolve towards the heuristics. Rather than just evolving towards the things that make the gene work best, the meme is selecting for being reproduced. And now, memes are being reproduced based on the heuristics, not based on genetic advantage. This is the first point where memes and genes really diverge in terms of what they're doing. Now, the memes they don't actually have to help you. They just have to make you think they help you, and then you're going to pick them up, and you're going to reproduce them, and other people are going to think they're going to help them. And now, memes are a real driving force, independent of the genes that spawned them. To summarize, Blackmore argues that once genes started evolving to use memes, the genes evolved these mechanisms, the heuristics that I was talking about a moment ago, that let memes spread independently of their fitness towards the genes. Brief sidebar, one example of memes spreading themselves independently of their fitness towards the genes can be found in a very fundamentally human activity, thinking. Why do we think so much? Thinking is expensive energy-wise, so genetically speaking, why haven't we optimized ourselves to turn our brains off the second we're not doing anything important? Sure, some degree of conscious thought is probably productive. Planning out the hunt is useful for catching the mammoth or whatever, but why all the time? We're not always engaged in activities that help us survive, but we're always consuming that energy of thought. Genetically, this makes no sense. I'm oversimplifying things a little bit here. There's maybe some sort of evolutionary psychological argument that could make it make sense because social value of constantly being engaged in thinking and gossiping behaviors, but it makes more sense if we consider it through the lens of the memes. Maybe we didn't think so much at first. We had genetic heuristics to aid us in understanding what's worth thinking about and what's not. But memes will optimize themselves towards those heuristics because being thought about for a meme is good. If you're being thought about, that means you're more likely to be repeated, and being repeated to a meme, that's the thing they optimize towards by definition. So, memes will slowly move towards whatever it is that lets them get thought about for more. And like dandelions sprouting in the cracks in a sidewalk, just because the genes have an interest in not doing that, the memes, remember, they adapt faster than the genes possibly can, and as a result, they'll always be able to adapt around whatever the heuristics are. Therefore, we're cursed to constant thought, and we all have depression. It's great. In this way, even the way we think, the fact that we think, can be understood usefully through this meme's eye view. Sidebar over. In brief, Blackmore then proceeds to argue that advances in communicative technology were also driven by mimetic advantage. Language, for example, the first communication technology, also has origins shrouded in mystery, with theories that only appeal to genetic advantage struggling to fully explain it. But Part 2b, the capacity for human language has been created by the memes. That's right, Blackmore argues that language evolved because it facilitated more accurate copying of memes, which spread more memes, which enabled better survival technologies, like talking while you hunt something, for example, which eventually wrapped back around to genetic advantage in a process she calls meme-gene coevolution. She summarizes meme-gene coevolution like this. Once imitation evolved, a second replicator, the meme, was born. As people began to copy each other, the highest quality memes did the best. That is, those with high fidelity, fecundity, and longevity. A spoken grammatical language resulted from the success of copyable sounds that were high in all three. The early speakers of this language not only copied the best speakers of the society, but also mated with them, creating natural selection pressures on the genes to produce brains that were even better at spreading the new memes. In this way, the memes and genes co-evolved to produce just one species with the extraordinary properties of a large brain and language. Languages, grammars, even particular words, these ways of communicating with each other... Communicating by each other? Why is that in my script? Communicating with each other spread through imitation and copying, whether it's learning your first language as a baby or another one later in life. So what else could languages be but themselves really big memes? Memes that not only spread themselves, but aid every other meme in their transmission too. And if a meme like language existed, one that essentially made the ecosystem bigger, giving every other meme more ways to expand and thrive, how could it do anything but take over the world? Part 2c, every communication technology has been created by the memes. Take everything I just said about language, how it's a meme itself, the technology and its use spreading through copying, and that because it improves transmission of other memes, it's more likely to be adopted. You can apply all of that same logic to writing. It made permanent what was otherwise ethereal, allowing for transmission of memes across time, longevity at a scale never seen before. Or the printing press. Democratizing writing made entirely new ways of spreading memes possible. Fecundity of those memes is going through the roof. Going back to genetics for a moment, DNA started out as blobs of self-replicating stuff, fragile and error-prone, and eventually evolved things like nuclei and the other mechanisms of the cell that I couldn't possibly explain to you if I tried, to copy themselves more consistently, and now we have these mechanisms that are so complicated that we struggle to understand them even today. Let's generalize that statement in the spirit of universal Darwinism. Replicators will, by chance, develop innovations over time that make them better at consistently replicating by increasing their longevity, fecundity, and/or fidelity, and then, because those innovations are useful to the replicators, they will spread, take over everywhere, and the ones that take advantage of it will replicate even more. Eventually, you'll get even more evolution on top of that initial evolution, and even though the thing that results at the end looks incredibly difficult to reach, it's just little steps of random chance, and the combination of them making the organism better and better and better. Genes did it with advances in biological technology. Memes did it with advances in communication technology. Basically what I'm saying here is that the printing press is the nucleus of ideas. The printing press is to ideas as the nucleus is to genetic code. It's a really weird way of thinking about things. It's kind of weird to think of the idea that ideas created the printing press and not people. But it's also kind of weird to say that genes created the nucleus, but they kind of did, maybe. That kind of makes sense. Did the internet create memes, or did memes create the internet so that they could evolve into internet memes? The word meme isn't a word anymore.
Plan? Word becomes sound? What's that called again? Semantic satiation? Yeah. Okay. All right.
If all technological development is for the purpose of making memes more and faster, then the internet is just another stage in that process. If memes spread through connections between people, then breaking down the geographical barriers that divide us just makes memes go faster. This fundamental driving force towards communication and the exchange of ideas has a complex interplay with social media and the consumerist incentives of the internet, a sort of symbiosis where memes are spread more efficiently because social media companies work to hijack our brains to consume and spread information at even greater rates, and social media companies in part succeed at that goal because our brains are wired for communicative sharing. Both the mimetic process and the social media process make each other stronger, but that's got to be another video because I could think about that for hours and I'd get nowhere really, so I'm going to stop there. Returning to Susan Blackmore of The Meme Machine, she saw much of this coming in 1999, though she didn't understand all the complex interplay that we can now observe. She did, however, have this to say on the internet. If the mimetic analysis I have given here is correct, then so long as human beings maintain the infrastructure, the system will proliferate out of anyone and anything's control, like a vast natural ecosystem. I don't know about you, but seeing that line in a book from 1999 really chilled me, and further led me to believe that Blackmore has something important to say, that mimetic theory, flawed as it may be, is worth a real look. So, culture has always been evolving, and cultural evolution can be understood through viewing ideas as memes, which, like genes, act as replicators and undergo a selection process in our minds that causes ideas to spread and change. As communication technology has advanced, the longevity, fecundity, and fidelity of memes has also increased, and now the internet, just another link in that chain of ever-increasing longevity, fecundity, fidelity, has tipped that simmering pot of culture into a boil. Part 3. Unpacking the internet meme. Whether you believe memes created the internet or not, you can't argue with the fact that they sure do live there. The internet has facilitated rapid change and, yes, even evolution of ideas. Just like Blackmore predicted, it has proliferated out of control, and its distinct regions, denoted both by the rigid boundaries of social media and the more flexible boundaries of different cultures within them, have come to resemble a vast natural ecosystem. Every internet meme, just like any meme, lives within specific ecosystems. A funny tweet, X post, sidebar, I can't say that word. Elon Musk, I don't like him very much. A funny tweet might get millions of views, but if I said to my grandmother across the table at Thanksgiving dinner, I'm not owned, I continue to insist as I slowly shrink and transform into a corn cob, no one would so much as laugh, much less be so amused by it that they continue to make jokes about it for years upon years, and my God, it's been more than 10 years since the corn cob tweet. We can all intuitively understand that internet culture is different, hard to translate in a way that feels unique. But that intuitive understanding doesn't come with it a knowledge of why it's different. What about it is so hard to translate? Armed with the tools of mimetic theory, we can make an attempt to dig a little deeper and finally come to an answer to the question, why is it so hard to understand an internet meme? To really understand this, I think we need to go back to the idea of memeplexes, or more formally, co-adapted meme complexes. Essentially, memes that go better together. Let's start by exploring a very simple form, the advice animal memes. These were extremely formulaic, and the formula was simple. You see this animal, you're going to have something about this. There were a bunch of these, and I'll edit them in postscript because I don't actually know them because I'm too young to remember. When we encounter one internet meme of this form, there are actually two memes, at least in the academic sense, that are interfacing to provide the humor. The first is the internet meme itself, the text, the meaning, the idea. The second is the meta meme, the understanding of the form that is an idea, that is itself comprehended through repeated exposure and imitation. When I see this image, the text will be about this. This understanding of what things like this are is part and parcel of the humor. It's clear that the meta meme is necessary to it. And so the meta meme increases the likelihood of replication for the original meme, the text that is on the image. Understanding the pattern makes it funnier, so it's more likely to get replicated. So, the meme text and the meta meme of pattern recognition come together in a sort of simple memeplex to create funny, at least by the standards of the early aughts. I would argue that most internet memes work this way, although oftentimes now there are several meta memes at work, and things can get incredibly complicated, as we'll get to in a little bit. But even the simple example, I think, demonstrates why it's so hard to explain a meme and impossible to convey to someone who doesn't understand it the humor that the meme understander will immediately have. When most people try to explain a meme, I believe they'll explain the text, which outside of the context of the meta meme isn't usually very funny on its own. So the other person will stare blankly or chuckle politely without any real amusement. Communication failed. If the explainer is a little bit better at communicating, they will explain the meta meme. This animal is used in situations like this, and as you can see, this text describes a situation like this. Or sometimes it doesn't, and that's funny because of irony. In this case, the other person will probably recognize the intention more clearly, but it's still difficult to see it through the eyes of somebody who already understands. That's because when we see a meme, we're not subjecting it to conscious analysis through the lens of the meta meme. We're seeing it. The whole thing put through the lens at the speed of unconscious thought so that when it arrives to our conscious mind, it is a coherent picture. Not meme and meta meme, but the two fused together into the meaning that both of them create together, both necessary to the other. Nothing short of experiencing the original meme with the meta meme already understood can replicate this experience. And this is part of why it's so hard to explain memes. People who are experiencing the meme as intended so often fail to even communicate the meta-mimetic layer because it's not part of the conscious experience. When you see a meme, you're not thinking about the structures and patterns that have gone into making it the way it is. You're just experiencing it and experiencing funny. But in order to communicate what it is, its essence is deeply bound up in those structures, even though they're not consciously perceived. But you could argue that this is kind of all humor. Humor's gained from making reference to something, and the humor's lost, or at least diminished, if you have to explain the reference. I'm coming closer. You could argue that this is kind of all humor. Humor's gained from making reference to something, and humor's lost, or at least diminished, when you have to explain that reference. If my grandfather makes a joke about something to do with golf, I don't find it funny. Even if it's explained and I understand the joke intellectually, I rarely laugh, and if I do, it's polite. And that's sort of the same mechanism a little bit as somebody not understanding what's going on the internet. So what's different? The internet, I contend, is different because of the speed of what I'm going to call mimetic drift. If my grandfather tells a joke about golf, I can usually tell that it's about golf, and I might have some passing familiarity to what it is. But the internet is so big, so fragmented, that there are cultures with which I've had even almost no contact, even as someone who has been on the internet a long time. And their jokes, they're not recognizable as about anything. They just are. They're so far adrift from the shared context that there's not even that passing familiarity. There's not a basis for starting to build understanding. And yes, all of that can happen without the internet. I'm sure if I heard a joke from any culture that I'm not super familiar with, we would experience something similar. But now we're experiencing that same fragmentation of culture at a much smaller scale with even the people we are closest to, potentially. And the internet enables it even more because The things are going faster. The internet increases the fecundity of memes. That's like why it exists, or at least a major function of it. And so it's different now, just because it's faster. Let me briefly illustrate a couple of examples. There's a podcast that I really liked a couple of years ago called Reply All. It's a podcast about the internet, and in between interesting investigative reporting about the internet's serious impacts on the world, they had a little comedy segment. They called it Yes, Yes, No. Yes, Yes, No was simple. The two hosts of the podcast were both well-versed in the internet, and their boss wasn't, and their boss would bring them a tweet that he didn't understand. And they would think about it, and they would say what, and then they would ask each of the three of them, do you understand this tweet? And what would usually happen at the start of the segment, yes, yes, no. Hence the name. Then the three would work together in explaining it until they reached complete understanding. Yes, yes, yes. In episode 114, Apocalypse Soon, they broke down a single tweet, a single image, really, from early 2018. Take a look. Maybe you remember some of this too. I was in middle school, so I barely do, but it's still there, knowledge on the edges of my mind from being immersed, in some ways, even then, in internet culture. This is all ancient internet history by now, really. Tide Pods, Uganda, Knuckles, Logan Paul. But explaining this tweet alone took them the entire runtime of a 40-minute episode. Really understanding these memes in the analytical sense required more information about them than most people who quoted them could have possibly known. Now, one of the joys of listening to Yes, Yes, No for me and for many others is that even though I usually thought I knew what these tweets were talking about, I still learned something new from the process of hearing them analytically broken down. The deep dive that was required for it all to make logical sense. I'll leave a link to this episode in the bibliography if you're interested. It is entertaining even to this day and might be interesting in light of the things that we've learned about in this video. But even at the end of all that, the 40 minutes, the hosts who had been in on the joke the whole time were still the only ones laughing. Their boss, if he was laughing at all, was laughing at the absurdity of it all, not at the original intended humor. The fundamental joke, even after 40 minutes, was just completely unreachable to him, and that seems unique. Second example, think about POG. Do you know what POG is? If not, wow, you are not in the target audience for this video at all, but by God, you are persevering. I'm impressed. If you do know what POG is, do you know why? Do you know why it's called POG? Some people do. It's kind of classic internet trivia at this point, but a lot of you watching this video who know POG, you know the word derived from the Twitch emote, derived from somebody's video that had POGs in it, or the collectible caps from the 90s juice drink that contained passion fruit, orange, and guava, POG. But you don't know all of that history. You don't need to know that POG is POG. It just is. Some of you have probably seen this Tumblr post about how the crucifixion of Jesus led to the word POG. POG as slang comes from the Twitch emote, taken from a video with POGs in them. What is a POG? A small cap from a juice drink that is traded and used in games by 90s kids, which was called POG, short for passion fruit, orange, guava. Passion fruit was named after its flower, the passion flower. Passion flowers were called flower of the five wounds in Portuguese, eventually being translated as passion fruit by the English in reference to the passion of Jesus, aka his last moments alive before being crucified. Think about the history embodied here. Notice how the first part of that, the recent history, is all within the last 10 or 20 years. More than that. The 90s was more than 20 years ago. But then the last couple of links, the naming of the passion flower and the crucifixion of Jesus, span hundreds of years. That's because culture is speeding up. References evolving and turning into their own new things to be referenced faster and faster. Turtles all the way down. POG is POG because Jesus, ultimately. But you didn't need to know all of that. You didn't have to know all of that to know what POG is, to use it and laugh at it. The metamimetic knowledge exists independent of knowing why. It's a castle of meaning whose foundations disappear into fog. Is it floating? Is there a ground there at all to be perceived? Internet memes, to me, feel uniquely out of reach as far as explaining all of that stuff goes. And that's the appeal of Yes, Yes, No. To dig into the origins that even the people quoting the memes don't know. To really understand that makes us feel more connected to each other again. Because the pace of memes today is pulling us apart. The castles of meaning are multiplying at an accelerating rate, growing faster and faster, and revealing their foundations even for a moment brings us comfort. We are coming from something similar after all, even if it doesn't seem that way at first. I think this is the answer to the first question of this video. We've done it. By an incredibly circuitous route, we've answered the question that we set out to answer. Why is it so damn hard to explain memes? Because memes evolve. And now they're doing it really, really fast. And it's only ever getting faster. And so pulling back the curtain until we reach a shared context with another person is only getting harder and harder. And that leaves us with one final burning question. Where does it end? Susan Blackmore, I think, would agree with the substance of this quote, if not its exact framing. By the end of the meme machine, she's arguing that the very concept of the self is a mimetic illusion, and that it just makes us share memes more if we think that we are, if the consciousness exists. Under this worldview, there's nothing we can do about it. The concept that we are different from the memes is just an illusion. It's the same. It's a deterministic worldview, sort of like those people who say everything that we think and feel is just chemical reactions happening in our brain, except instead of saying chemical reactions, it's the interplay of genetics and mimetics eating away at free will until there's just nothing left. Under this view, the outcome of the exponential growth in the quantity of memes and the myriad social effects that's engendered is just an ecosystem doing something. It might be that something that it's going to do is destroy itself and us with it. That the weight of all of the memes and the divisions in our society that they've caused is just going to tear us apart with the inevitability of gravity. With constant mimetic bombardment, our lives and ourselves become more and more stressful and complicated. I wonder how much mimetic pressure the self can take. Susan Blackmore. Maybe explaining funny memes is so hard because shared cultural context is disappearing under the weight of algorithms feeding everybody hyper-individualized streams of content, and it's only going to get worse, and relating to one another is only going to be increasingly hard until everything falls apart and our fake self-illusion can't do anything about it. Or maybe not. I don't believe that. I can't point to the place in the argument where Blackmore loses me. Every step feels logical, every move considered, and I think the mimetic theory has a lot of explanatory power for phenomena that other theories don't really seem to address. There's definitely something there, but I don't think it's everything. I don't think that beautiful art moves me because of memes, because I pursue it for myself. The satisfaction that I derive from it is internal and moving and exists without any need to be shared. I walk outside nearly every night and I watch the sunset for myself. I'm actually going to talk about that for a moment because I think it serves as a particularly good example. I run an Instagram account where I post pictures of the sunset every night. This is kind of mimetically explainable because I'm interfacing with people and posting and adding to the previously mentioned hyper-individualized streams of content. But if that were all it was, why would I put my phone down and stand and walk around and look and see and smell and hear and be in that area? Take in that view. Smell that smell that the air really only ever has in October, that a perfect picture couldn't capture because the view is about more than a perfect picture. Why would I do that? For the memes? No. That's no value to the memes. It's just for me. Moments like that make me think that the deterministic, pessimistic worldview that Susan Blackmore has in the end of the meme machine, it just can't be right. Moments like that make me think everything's probably going to be okay.